Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post, and I'm so honored today to be joined by author and humanitarian Dru Hammer. Her new memoir is called Hammered. Well, Dru, I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank
You,
you.
you are so vulnerable in your new book.
Oh, well, thank you for reading it. I just decided it took me 10 years to write it because if you write a book, I really believe that you have to bring in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in our family, there's just a lot of all of the above. So I thought, you know what? But that's what Jesus does is when you have problems and when you're going through all these horrendous things, God is faithful. And that's really the whole message of my book is the faithfulness of God when our hearts get hammered, right?
Well, and everything you've been through is so public. Your
Right.
story is really out there for the world to see. So, I mean, I'm really just impressed that you were like, okay, I'm going to take my narrative into my own hands and talk about what
Right.
really happened, but also glorify God in the process.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's what we're supposed to do in everyday living, right? It's just that ours happened to be spread all over the world, and that I couldn't control. And I really learned a tremendous lesson from Armie because he never fought back. He never said a bad word about any of the people coming against him. And, there's always another side. You know how that goes. So he just decided, I'm not going to speak out, that the truth always comes out. And that's what he did. So occasionally I would call him and go, well, if you won't speak out, can I speak out? Because those girls stayed in my home and, they were in love with you. It wasn't, and if you were really that terrible of a person, they wouldn't have wanted to be with you like that. So anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Take me back to growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and how that really shaped who you are, especially as you entered into this very different world that is the Hammer dynasty.
Yes, yes. Well, I always say that's really what has saved me because my parents found Jesus. Neither one of them were raised in a Christian home. And my parents found Jesus when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And it literally changed everything in their lives. And when you're a child and you see this positive change, because both my parents were raised extremely poor, and my dad was so driven to a fault, if you will, and driven to the exclusion of his family because he just was not going to raise his children in poverty. And he met this group of young Christian businessmen and they went to lunch together and they all held hands and prayed at the lunch table. My dad said, I'd never seen that before. And I was kind of mortified, like, you do this in public? Because my dad had never been exposed to that before. But here's what's so important about our Christian walk with Jesus is people are watching us. So, our actions and how we live our lives is the way people are going to view Christianity if they don't know Jesus first, because we're his hands and his feet. And thankfully, those young businessmen were very faithful to the Lord, lived their lives according to the word of God, and they led my dad and my mother to Jesus. And my parents started having Bible studies. And they were mentored by Kenneth Hagin and Oral Roberts, because being from Tulsa, Oklahoma, you're in the mecca of the whole Pentecostal movement. So the beauty is, too, I was never taught to limit God. We never put God in a box. Because I know a lot of people say, oh, God doesn't heal today, and all the gifts of the Spirit aren't for today. And I'm like, well, I kind of grew up with, under them. And actually, I was healed from an incurable, excuse me, an incurable kidney disease called polycystic kidneys. And because I had seen my dad, what my dad did is he ended up selling some of his businesses, putting it in a foundation, continued business his whole life. He was still developing land. Excuse me. Sorry about that, Leah. Anyway, hope you edit that out.
Oh, I will.
So, so anyway, he saw the miraculous through the Kenneth Hagin's and the Oral Roberts. And he just didn't limit God. So God called my dad into a healing ministry. So my dad didn't do it full time. He was a businessman, but he literally supported his ministry until he was too old to do it. He passed away a couple of years ago at 87, and he was traveling around the world, paying for every dime, having healing ministries and services all over the world. And when you grow up as a child and that's what you see all into your adulthood, and you see people walk out of wheelchairs and the blind people receiving their sight, there's no way, Leah, that I could ever limit God. And I always want to say, wait a minute. He is the creator of the universe. Who are we as mere peons with our finite minds? Who are we to limit the God and the creator of the universe who is infinite? So that really directed every step of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you talk about in your book your relationships with your sons, Armie and Victor, and it's really woven throughout your story. How has motherhood influenced your journey? And what have been some of the greatest joys and challenges along the way? Because I really kept seeing this as a theme throughout your book.
Right. Well, I love my boys, and I've actually talked to both of them today. And it's funny because I was just on Armie's podcast. He just started a podcast and it's called Armie Hammer Time. And he calls me and he says, because, they know where I stand. And he says, Mom, I actually think this is a bad idea. But my producers think it would be a really good idea to have you on my podcast. And I answered him and I go, Armie, Jesus and I would love to be on your podcast. And he goes, that's my point. Exactly. But what I did, Leah, is I love my boys as much as anyone, but I'm also a tough mom because I refuse to ever be the popular mom. And when Armie was going through his ordeal, I would call him and say, I'm praying for you. I'm not going to throw it out to the universe. You are into meditation at this point and all these other things, and it's not the way I raised you. But there also are no grandchildren in heaven. There's only children. So we are called by God, according to the word, to raise our children in the ways of the Lord and raise them under our Christian beliefs because we believe it's the truth or we wouldn't be doing it, correct? But they have to make their own choice and they have to choose whether they live their life for Jesus or they don't. And, I actually say to both of them, well, you have a praying mother and you literally do not have a chance in hell because I'm praying every day for you and I know God is faithful. But you also have to love them through it. There was never a time where I wasn't there for them, where I wouldn't help them out if they needed help. And I was always there for them, but they always knew where I stood. And one of the reasons why I had so many people say, just don't talk about it. They know who you are. And I said, well, you know what? If Jesus is your number one priority, I'm going to talk about it because I think you talk about what's important in your life, and I'm called to be an evangelist. And that's why I've written my book, and I have all these products that are all going to be sold and going into helping single parents that can't afford to pay for their children and electric bills and all these things. So I just know that I am who I am. And I think of the story of Eli, the prophet in the Old Testament. And God struck Eli and his grown sons dead because he did not hold them accountable to the word of God. They would work in the temple like they were called to. They were Levites, and the sons were doing immoral, evil things, and Eli never held them to the carpet, if you will. And I thought, I will never be that mother. I may not win popularity contests, but my kids will always know where I stand. They know what I believe. And as a matter of fact, Armie was even on the Jimmy Kimmel show one night, and he's like, oh, my mother is going to hate this story. And I called him immediately. You're right. I hate that story. I did not raise you that way. You accepted Jesus as a child. And unfortunately, as you know in the book, he had a terrible thing happen where his youth pastor molested him at 14. And sometimes it's easy for people to blame God, but I keep telling my children, people will fail us, but God will never fail us.
Mhm. Well, how has your faith sustained you as your family really is in a very public situation? I mean, there's documentaries out about your family. Of course, Armie was in the news a lot a couple of years ago. How did your faith sustain you during all of this? Because this had to be very difficult. You have to be a very strong person to be resilient in the face of all of this.
Well, and I think our strength comes from the Lord. And it's that saying, which you know very well, having 4 children, that a mother is as happy as her least happy child. But saying that, I will also say that we cannot rely on our children for our happiness and our joy. Our joy comes from the Lord. So when the world was falling apart around us, Armie even told me on the podcast, he said at one time he was the number 3 most Googled person in the world during that period because it was during COVID. It was the perfect storm. People were trapped in their houses. They couldn't go to work. Kids couldn't go to school. It was this feeding frenzy, if you will. And, I just decided, do I trust God or am I going to trust people because people fail us? And again, our joy comes from the Lord. It doesn't come from our people making us happy. And I have a ministry with women because I went through a difficult divorce after a 25-year marriage, and I was heartbroken. And I always say, I married, I had people ask me, well, do you think you made a mistake and married the wrong person? I said, absolutely not. I loved my husband. I loved him till the day he died. He died a few years ago, and I would go into his hospital room and crawl in bed with him and pray over him and, ask Jesus to heal him, of course, because I believe in healing, but he got the ultimate healing. He's worshiping the Lord in heaven. But the thing is you have to rely on God for your joy because the world could absolutely be falling apart around you and you can still have joy if you trust God. And I also have to think, wow, God, you must have something really fabulous for the Hammer family because our entire family has been obliterated. And by the way, the woman who did the documentary was Armie's aunt, who had not even seen my children since they were 5 and 7 because she had sued the family. That's another whole long story. But anyways, I just think that we can have peace amongst chaos, and that's the word shalom. And Jesus said, I am the Prince of Peace. So I just kept relying on Jesus as my source of peace and joy.
Now, are your sons walking with the Lord, or what are their spiritual journeys like?
Well, I always say, it's never up to any individual to judge if another person, what their relationship is with Jesus. I don't necessarily see it on the outside, the manifestations. I don't necessarily see them seeking the Lord deeply. But again, I don't think they have a chance because I pray every single day. And the best thing I can do is to be a godly example to them. And the rest is up to them. We're only responsible for ourselves.
Another theme in your book is financial independence. Talk to me about why you
Yes.
wanted so much to highlight this topic, especially for women after divorce. And what advice would you offer to women who are going through a similar transition to what you went through?
Well, I think financial independence is very important because I don't think there's one woman in the world, no matter what religion, no matter what you believe, walks down the aisle and says, well, let's give this a shot. Maybe this will work. Maybe this won't, but let's see if this will work. No, I mean, in our vows, it says to death do us part. So when I walk down the aisle 40 years ago, I never in a million years dreamed that 25 years later, I would be going through a very difficult divorce. And the point is, I think a lot of times there even can be financial deception in a marriage. And when you go through a divorce, assets can be hidden. You can sign documents you don't realize you signed through the years. When I went to my divorce settlement, there was a stack of paper, and his attorney said, "Are these your signatures?" And I looked through a couple of them and I go, "Looks like it." And they said, "Well, do you know what these documents are?" And I said, "I have no idea." They said, "Well, why would you sign documents that you have not read?" I said, "Because my mother can trust my father." And that's all I've ever known. My father was a very trustworthy person, and I loved my husband and I trusted him. Why would I stay in a marriage with a person that I didn't trust? That would be ridiculous, right? What's the point of that? But sometimes, again, God doesn't fail us, but people can fail us, and there can be deceptions. And say, for example, they're in an affair, they might try to protect themselves financially just in case this happens. And I meet women, Leah, all the time that are so struggling. First of all, the inflation from this past administration has just completely destroyed the economy. And, when a dozen eggs cost $6, these single parents can't make it. And they're working 2 and 3 jobs trying to make it. And they came out of marriage without really previous, I should say, skills because they'd been a mother their whole life. And that is the most noble job you could be. But I just want to encourage women that God gives everybody talents and abilities. And mine happened to be, I didn't even know I had it. It's creativity. And I renovated my first house, and who knows? I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had the Laura Ashley Kleenex boxes that matched the lampshades. I mean, we're talking 40 years ago, and it was so cool back then. But I've done over 40 properties now, and I have learned each time, and I hone my skills, and I stay up to date on what people really want. And I think it's important because God gives us all creativity, and we need to pray. And I love the prayer where it says, God gives you the desires of your heart. Well, I could never be a WNBA basketball player. I just couldn't. So the point is, my creativity was the one thing I excelled in. So what I did is I just started using it and renovating houses and making mistakes, but continuing. And I just really encourage women in my book to pray about it and ask God, what is the talent that you've given me? I mean, I've seen women that have started. I saw a woman at my church yesterday, and she is a brand new believer, was left penniless from a divorce. And she's this incredible baker. And now she started this business, and it's all organic. And she goes to car dealerships and leaves these big baskets, and they sell these cookies when people come in and they're looking at cars and they're hungry, or salesmen that want to grab something great to eat. She found a way, and I really believe God has a way. And I just want to encourage women, even if you are married, get something on the side and put a little money on the side just in case, not to put doubt in women's mind that, oh, well, just in case your marriage doesn't work. But it's always good to have money on the side anyways, maybe to surprise your husband with a fabulous gift or do something special for your children. So that's why I encourage women.
So, Dru, you are a humanitarian. You are involved in so many different things. Talk a little bit about some of these initiatives you are involved in, especially ahead of the holiday season.
Well, so I believe, because it's biblical, that we are blessed to be a blessing. Because when I came out of my divorce, I wasn't left penniless, thankfully, because I had renovated 27 homes during our marriage. And no matter what documents I signed, God still, that was my part of my provision. And so because I'm blessed, I started a foundation. It's called Hammered Heart Foundation. And I have products that I sell. I have these glass crosses. Can you see them?
No.
Oh, darn. Okay. Well, you can look on my website, Druville. And I told you before we started recording that I named my company Druville because my sons tell people that they grew up in Whoville because I decorate in these crazy hot pinks and lime greens and lemon, all these bright colors. So I started a brand and I sell these wonderful glass crosses. They're big, thick, chunky, like paperweights. And hammered hearts, and they say love, joy, and peace in all different colors. And all the money is going to go this Christmas to women around the country in churches. And I set up entities. It's called the Hammered Heart Fund. And they get all the single women and men that are really struggling, single parents, and they give them like $100 gas card, $100 for themselves, $100 for each child, and $100 for a Christmas meal. And because there's just a lot of parents, the thought of waking up on Christmas morning and not being able to give my children anything on Christmas just absolutely breaks my heart. So I do that, and you can buy my book or my glass products, and all the proceeds go into this fund to help women. And there's a lot of single men now who are struggling as well. And I'm also involved with Child Help. They've helped over 12 million children from child abuse. And I'm on the national board. And I worked at the LA Dream Center for years and worked with women out of human trafficking and drug addiction and alcoholism. So I just really believe that God gives us so much and He's so faithful that my greatest joy now is to being able to go out and help other people that are going through the same thing. And Leah, my biggest thing is I really want to help women with forgiveness because I think forgiveness and bitterness will eat people alive. And I meet women all the time that are just eaten up with bitterness. And I had lunch one time in Carmel, and this woman was just venomous about her ex-husband and how he ran off with her best friend, and a horrible situation. But she was so eaten up with bitterness that I thought maybe it had just happened 6 months ago. And I said, well, how long ago was this? She said 12 years. So what people don't realize is when you carry that unforgiveness, you carry that bitterness, it doesn't hurt the other person. They've moved on. You hurt yourself, and you also hinder your relationship with Jesus, because Jesus says, I can't forgive you until you can forgive others. And I don't know about you, but I need forgiveness every single day. So that's one of my big messages in my book as well, because it only hurts yourself when you harbor and carry all that unforgiveness. And I know Jesus freed me. I actually became very good friends with my former husband, and I was there to help him when he passed away. And we still spent holidays together with our grandchildren. And does God want us to be divorced? Absolutely not. God says He hates divorce and it leads to sin. And boy, does it. But God can also restore as well.